Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring this blog post that you sent over.
Okay.
It's called Certainty and Ignorance Leave Awareness Unseen.
Interesting title.
Yeah, it's pretty intriguing, right? And it gets even better when you start digging into all the author's ideas about how self-awareness is influenced by things like societal structures and our constant search for these external solutions.
What really struck me when I was reading this was this central question that the author asks, which is, why do we often overlook our own inner wisdom and the shared humanity that connects us all?
Yeah.
It's a question that has implications, I think, not just for our personal lives, but also how we function within society as a whole.
Absolutely. And the author kind of jumps right into this concept of like collective consciousness and its influence on like individual knowing. It's like we're both shaped by the collective, but we're also contributing to its evolution at the same time.
Right.
Which is a very mind-bending thought.
I know. It's kind of like, imagine a dance, where the individual and the collective are constantly in motion, influencing each other's steps.
Yeah.
And, the author even uses the example of cultural heritage, how we inherit ways of thinking and behaving from our families and communities. But this also brings up this question of whether new ideas are truly new or just echoes of what's already present in the collective unconscious.
Which makes you think about like all of those trends in personal development and whether they're really offering like innovative approaches or just repackaging existing knowledge. It's like almost like fashion trends that cycle back around with a slightly different look every time.
This makes me think of something else the author brings up, which is this concept of safety containers, particularly, in workshops or transformative practices. And they really question, whether these spaces truly foster authenticity or if they kind of end up hindering it with these like unspoken rules and taboos.
Right. And the author even observes that even though you have these verbal assurances of safety, there's often this like palpable fear of truly expressing yourself.
Yes.
And they even use a specific example of spiritual practitioners being cautioned against sharing their shadow outside of specific courses.
It's interesting.
So it seems like these containers, while intended to create a safe space, might inadvertently create this culture of hiding certain parts of ourselves. Have you ever found that to be true in your own experience?
I think, it is a bit paradoxical that we create these spaces for vulnerability and authenticity, but then we impose limitations on what can be shared. And I think this kind of leads perfectly into what the author talks about next, which is this idea of the outsider experience. This feeling of being unseen and unheard. And they connect this to societal pressures to conform, arguing that both the individual and society contribute to this sense of separation.
So what's the author's solution then?
Well, they seem to really emphasize recognizing our shared humanity. They suggest that understanding and empathy are key to bridging this gap between the individual and the collective.
Got it.
It's not about one side winning or losing, but finding that common ground and acknowledging the interconnectedness of our experiences.
Which I think resonates deeply, in kind of our current climate, where division and polarization seem to be so prevalent.
Very much so.
It's a very powerful reminder, I think, that beneath the surface of our differences, we are all united by our shared human experiences.
Right. We all navigate hopes, fears, dreams, vulnerabilities, even if those manifest in unique ways for each of us.
Now, the author introduces this really interesting concept called the subject self. And they describe it as like our true essence that's often suppressed or even feared.
It is a fascinating idea. And the author observes that instead of embracing our own inner awareness, we often seek external solutions, like gurus or specific answers, as if someone else holds the key to unlocking our true selves.
So we're essentially looking for shortcuts instead of doing the work of self-discovery.
Exactly. And speaking of seeking, the author also challenges this notion that later stages of development are inherently superior. Right? It's not about reaching a specific destination,
Right.
but rather about embracing the ongoing journey
Okay.
of growth and understanding. Each stage presents its own unique set of challenges and opportunities for learning. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And this makes me think about the author's emphasis on the human factor, like
Okay.
these recurring patterns and vulnerabilities that we all share,
Yes.
regardless of our background or, perceived level of development.
I think it's crucial to acknowledge this human factor because neglecting it can lead to division.
Yeah.
We judge others based on perceived flaws, forgetting that we too possess those vulnerabilities.
Right. It's like that classic saying, judge not lest ye be judged.
Exactly.
We tend to focus on the shortcomings of others
Yes.
while often overlooking our own imperfections.
Exactly. And the author seems to advocate for a more compassionate approach, one where we recognize and accept our shared flaws as part of what makes us human.
This brings us to willful ignorance,
Okay.
which the author defines as this conscious or unconscious choice to remain blind to certain aspects of ourselves or reality.
Right.
It's like choosing to stay in the dark even when the light's shining brightly.
Right. And what I find really interesting is this observation from the author,
Yeah.
that even those at high levels of development can experience willful ignorance.
Oh, wow.
It's as if, even with self-awareness and spiritual insight,
Yeah.
there are still areas where we choose to remain oblivious,
Yeah.
perhaps because the truth is just too painful or challenging. Do you think that rings true for you at all?
Yeah, it's almost as if we build these mental fortresses to
Yeah.
kind of protect ourselves from
Yeah.
uncomfortable truths. We
Right.
create these mental safe spaces where we don't have to confront those things that make us feel vulnerable or insecure.
And yet this avoidance can have significant consequences,
Exactly.
both for ourselves and for our relationship.
Absolutely.
Ignoring aspects of reality limits our capacity for growth and understanding.
Yeah.
It distorts our worldview,
Right.
and it hinders genuine connection.
So how do we break free from this cycle then of willful ignorance and avoidance?
Well, the author brings up this idea of embracing what they call the heroine's journey.
Okay, that sounds pretty epic.
It does.
What exactly do they mean by that?
It's based on this archetypal journey of the hero or heroine,
Okay.
which is a narrative that's common across cultures and centuries. It often involves a call to adventure, a descent into darkness, confronting fears,
Right.
and finally a triumphant return.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the connection here.
Yeah.
The author seems to be suggesting that personal growth is also a journey.
Yes.
Requiring us to face our shadows, embrace those vulnerabilities,
It is.
and ultimately emerge transformed.
Wow.
It's not about bypassing the difficult parts, but moving through them.
Right, exactly. And the author emphasizes that a beginner's mindset is crucial for this journey.
Okay.
Approaching life with humility, acknowledging that we don't have all the answers, and staying open to learning are all essential parts of the process.
So it's about letting go of the need to be right or perfect or have everything figured out.
Right.
It's more about embracing the unknown and allowing ourselves to be surprised by what we discover. What stood out to you about this idea of approaching self-discovery with a beginner's mindset?
I think it's refreshing.
Yeah.
Because so often we get caught up in needing to be experts in our own lives.
Yeah.
And embracing the beginner's mindset takes the pressure off, allowing us to approach learning with curiosity and a sense of wonder,
Right.
rather than a need to have all the answers.
I think that's a fantastic place to kind of pause for a moment. We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From this dance between the individual and the collective to the limitations of safety containers, the importance of acknowledging our shared humanity,
Right.
and embracing that subject self and a beginner's mindset on this journey of personal growth.
There's certainly a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
And it seems like all of these seemingly disparate concepts are interwoven in really interesting ways.
Absolutely.
We'll definitely delve deeper into the author's perspective on the human factor, willful ignorance, and the heroine's journey a little bit later.
Okay, sounds good. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how acknowledging our shared humanity,
Yeah.
those recurring patterns and vulnerabilities that we all have, is a crucial part of personal growth.
It's about recognizing that the human factor, as the author calls it, is something we all experience. We might be at different points on our journeys,
Yeah.
but we all have blind spots and make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And forgetting this can lead to judgment and division, creating distance between ourselves and others.
And the author specifically cautions against letting this human factor become a weapon.
Yes.
It's so easy to judge others based on their perceived flaws, but it's like looking in a mirror, isn't it?
Right.
Those flaws we see in others often reflect aspects of ourselves that we might not want to acknowledge.
Absolutely. And instead of using our shared vulnerabilities as a way to connect, we can end up creating more separation and conflict. The author seems to be advocating for a more compassionate approach, recognizing our shared humanity and embracing our flaws as part of the richness of the human experience.
Speaking of things we might not want to acknowledge, the author dives into this concept of willful ignorance.
Right.
Consciously or unconsciously choosing to remain blind to certain parts of ourselves or reality.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're afraid of what we might find if we truly look within.
And what's interesting is that the author suggests that this willful ignorance isn't limited to those who are unaware or unengaged in personal growth.
Okay.
They observe that even those at what might be considered high levels of development can still experience it.
So even when we've achieved a certain degree of self-awareness or spiritual insight, there might still be areas where we choose to remain in the dark, maybe because the truth is just too uncomfortable to face.
Yes.
Have you ever encountered that in your own life?
I think it's something we all grapple with to some extent.
Right.
There are always those areas, those shadows within ourselves that we might instinctively shy away from. It takes courage to truly shine a light on those darker corners, even if, as the author points out, doing so can be crucial for our continued growth.
It's almost like we build these elaborate defenses to protect ourselves from discomfort, creating mental safe spaces where we don't have to confront those aspects of ourselves or our reality that we'd rather avoid.
But as you mentioned earlier, this avoidance can have significant consequences, not just for our own personal development, but for our relationships as well.
Absolutely.
When we choose to ignore certain parts of ourselves or our reality, it creates a distorted worldview that prevents us from fully engaging with life and connecting authentically with others. It's like trying to build a house on a foundation riddled with cracks. Eventually, the whole structure becomes unstable.
So how do we break free from this cycle of willful ignorance and avoidance? The author proposes embracing something called the heroine's journey, which sounds pretty epic. What exactly do they mean by that?
It's a fascinating concept. Drawing upon the archetypal journey of the hero or heroine, a narrative that appears in myths and stories across cultures and throughout history. This journey typically involves a call to adventure. A descent into darkness or the unknown, confronting one's deepest fears, and ultimately a triumphant return transformed by the experience.
So the author is suggesting that personal growth is also a journey, a process of confronting our shadows, embracing our vulnerabilities, and ultimately emerging transformed by those experiences.
Precisely. It's not about bypassing the difficult parts or seeking only the positive, but about courageously facing those challenges and using them as catalysts for growth and transformation.
And how does the beginner's mindset, which we talked about earlier, factor into this heroine's journey?
The author emphasizes the importance of approaching this journey with humility, recognizing that we don't have all the answers and that there's always more to learn. It's about letting go of the need to be right, perfect, or in control. And instead embracing the unknown with curiosity and openness.
It's like stepping into a new landscape without a map, trusting our inner compass to guide us. The author seems to be saying that true wisdom comes not from knowing everything, but from being willing to learn to be surprised and to embrace the journey, even when it takes us into the unknown.
That willingness to embrace the unknown is so important. It reminds me of something the author says about contentment. That it's not a destination, but a way of being.
That's interesting. Tell me more about the author's perspective on contentment.
The author suggests that true contentment isn't about achieving some external goal or acquiring possessions. Instead, it arises from knowing oneself fully. Both the somebody and the nobody, as they put it.
So it's about accepting all parts of ourselves. The light and shadow, and integrating them into a unified whole.
Exactly. The author uses the analogy of a dance between the somebody and the nobody. The somebody is the part of us that has achieved things, has a role in the world. The nobody is that part of us that is simply present, connected to something larger than ourselves. And true contentment arises when we can embrace both of these aspects and allow them to coexist in harmony.
That's such a beautiful image, the somebody and the nobody dancing together. It speaks to this idea that we are both unique individuals with our own stories and experiences, and also part of something much larger than ourselves, connected to the web of life in a profound way. What do you think that dance looks like in everyday life?
I think it's about finding that balance between action and stillness,
Okay.
between striving and being. It's about showing up in the world, engaging with our passions and purpose, while also cultivating a sense of inner peace and acceptance.
So it's not about giving up on our goals or aspirations.
No, not at all.
But about approaching them from a place of wholeness and integration, recognizing that our worth isn't dependent on external achievement.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where we can fully embrace both our somebodyness and our nobodyness, recognizing that both are essential parts of who we are.
It sounds like achieving that sense of balance is a journey in itself.
It is.
And I'm curious, what does the author say about the path to cultivating this sense of contentment?
The author seems to suggest that it's a deeply personal journey.
Okay.
And there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
However, they do offer some valuable insights into the process.
What, for example?
They emphasize the importance of cultivating pure awareness.
Okay.
A state of being where our true essence can simply rest, free from the constant striving for achievement or external validation.
So it's about quieting the mind.
Yes.
Letting go of those constant thoughts and desires and simply being present in the moment. Almost like hitting the pause button on all the noise and busyness of life and allowing ourselves to just be.
The author seems to be suggesting that this pure awareness is already present within us. Waiting to be discovered. It's not something we need to create or attain, but rather something we need to uncover by peeling back the layers of conditioning and expectation that keep us from experiencing the joy and peace that are already present within.
This makes me think about all the messages we receive from society about what it means to be successful, happy, and fulfilled. It's often about achieving, acquiring, and constantly striving for more.
Right. And the author seems to be challenging those messages, suggesting that true fulfillment comes not from adding more to our lives, but from stripping away those layers of conditioning and expectation that prevent us from experiencing the contentment and wholeness that are already within us.
So it's not about doing more, being more, or having more, but about recognizing that we are already enough just as we are.
Precisely. And perhaps, as the author suggests, it's about having the courage to say no to those external desires that constantly pull us away from ourselves. Those desires that promise happiness but ultimately leave us feeling empty and unfulfilled.
It's about finding that inner strength to resist the allure of those quick fixes and external solutions and instead turn inward, embracing the journey of self-discovery and cultivating a sense of contentment that arises from within. This is such a rich and insightful exploration of the author's ideas.
It really is.
And I think there's even more to uncover as we continue our dive into certainty and ignorance leave awareness unseen.
Definitely.
Welcome back to our deep dive into certainty and ignorance leave awareness unseen.
Okay.
Before the break, we were talking about the author's perspective on contentment.
Right.
How it's not so much about like external achievements, but more about like an internal shift towards self-acceptance.
And I think it's important to remember that this contentment isn't some sort of like static endpoint, but like a continuous process of self-discovery and integration.
Right.
It's about embracing all aspects of ourselves. Both the somebody and the nobody.
So rather than striving to become some like idealized version of ourselves, it's about recognizing that our imperfections, our complexities, all of it is part of what makes us whole.
Precisely. The author uses this really beautiful metaphor of dance between those two aspects of ourselves. Somebody who has achieved things has a story to tell, and the nobody who is simply present, connected to something larger.
Yeah, I love that image of a dance.
It's a good one.
It reminds me that, you know, we are both these unique individuals with our own stories and experiences, but also part of something so much greater than ourselves. Do you think that's what the author means?
I think so.
By pure awareness. This state where our true essence can simply rest.
I think you're right on the mark. The author seems to be suggesting that this pure awareness isn't something that we need to seek outside of ourselves.
Okay.
It's already present within each of us. It's just a matter of uncovering it.
So it's not about adding more to our lives,
Right.
but peeling back those layers of conditioning and expectations that prevent us from experiencing the joy that's already there.
Exactly. It takes a certain amount of courage, I think, to turn away from all those external solutions and quick fixes that we're constantly bombarded with.
Right.
But the author seems to be suggesting that true and lasting contentment comes from within.
It's almost like we need to retrain ourselves to look inward instead of outward.
I agree.
We're so conditioned to believe that happiness comes from achieving, acquiring, and constantly striving for more.
It's a powerful message.
Yeah.
And one that I think many of us struggle with in our modern world.
For sure.
But the author's insights remind us that genuine contentment doesn't depend on external circumstances.
Right.
It's about cultivating a sense of inner peace and acceptance that comes from knowing and embracing ourselves fully.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into certainty and ignorance, leave awareness unseen, what are some key takeaways that our listener can reflect on?
Well, first, I think the author's emphasis on the interconnectedness
Okay.
of self-awareness, societal structures, and our pursuit of external solutions is something worth pondering. You know, and they encourage us to question those systems and beliefs that shape our lives.
Right.
And to recognize that true contentment is an inside job.
Yeah.
Not something we find out there in the world.
And that journey of self-discovery, as we've been discussing, isn't about reaching some perfect end state.
Right.
It's an ongoing process that requires us to embrace our vulnerabilities, challenge our assumptions, and cultivate that beginner's mindset.
Exactly.
Always open to learning and growing.
And perhaps the most important takeaway is that contentment, as the author envisions, it isn't a destination, but a way of being.
Right.
It's a state of presence and acceptance that arises from a deep understanding and appreciation of our own humanity, flaws, and allures.
So much to think about. To our listener, as you move through your day, we encourage you to consider, what are you truly seeking? Where might your own blind spots and chosen ignorance be hindering your growth?
It's a good question.
And most importantly, how can you cultivate a deeper sense of contentment and wholeness within yourself?
Those are questions worth pondering.
Indeed they are. And that wraps up another deep dive. We'll be back next time with more thought-provoking explorations. Until then, keep diving deep.